Now, to discuss Prime Minister Modi's infrastructure push in Jammu and Kashmir as a strategic signal to Pakistan and how it fortifies India's broader diplomatic outreach following Operation Sindoor, we have with us Professor Harsh Vardhan Pant. He is the Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. Professor Pant, thank you for being with us. Now, in what ways do large-scale projects, in Jammu and Kashmir serve as both economic enablers as well as geopolitical statements to Pakistan?
Mark, I think in some fundamental ways, this is a transformative moment in India's relationship with the world when it comes to the Kashmir issue. Because what India is messaging from Kashmir, that not only Kashmir has always been and will continue to be an integral part of India, but also all the questions that had been raised in the past about alienation, about this miscommunication, about a lack of connection with Kashmir. Those questions are being answered once and for all. India is shaping not only the landscape of Kashmir by bringing in these big ticket projects, but also shaping that larger narrative of how as India's development moves ahead, Kashmir will also have Kashmir will also benefit from India's economic growth story. Something that India's critics had in the past pointed out that, look, Kashmir remains a heavily militarized, entity, and therefore perhaps India has not yet integrated Kashmir well. But what Prime Minister has done now is to once and for all answer those critics that as far as Pakistan is concerned, it not only has no locus standi on the question, but India is continuing to move ahead with its developmental projects, once again highlighting how Pakistan and Pakistani military wants to undercut that precise development.
Right,
it was because
absolutely.
of this reason that Pahalgam incident happened, that the move towards economic growth that Kashmir has been witnessing since the last few years, it was that they want to stop, and that is something India will not allow to happen.
Professor Pant, have India's multi-party delegations after Operation Sindoor succeeded, in amplifying India's infrastructural developments as well, and the broader message that you brought out of stability and strength in Kashmir?
I think that was one of the most important messages that went through the entire world. And I think there is also, Mark, some misunderstanding that, that we were out there to convince the world about our position. I think it was these multi-party parliamentary delegations that went across the world. They were telling one basic truth, and the truth was that Kashmir is becoming more and more integral to India's own developmental agenda, and that ordinary Kashmiris are benefiting from it. And that's the reason why Pakistan is feeling so isolated and threatened by these developments. And I think that was a message that different delegations in different parts of the world conveyed to wider constituencies across the world, that as India moves towards achieving higher growth rates, as India becomes one of the fastest growing major economies in the world, as India achieves its position in the global economic hierarchy, Kashmir will walk hand in hand with India rather than an entity that has to be looked at through an India-Pakistan prism, because that prism has been shattered once and for all.
Indeed. And Professor Pant, how will this improved connectivity boost, the economic potential of Jammu and Kashmir?
One of the things, Mark, that Kashmir had been struggling with over the last few decades is, of course, the wider security situation, which has now been stabilized. But this wider connectivity issue, that Kashmir had not been connected very well with India, and in some ways, this idea that somehow Kashmir is outside, India's economic horizons, because of course there is there is political instability, there is militancy, etc. As Indian government has managed to bring a degree of political control, a degree of political legitimacy, a degree of stabilization in Kashmir, we are now witnessing how significant economic benefits can be reaped through this kind of stability. And as we build these major infrastructure projects, as we connect, as we bring Kashmir into India's heartland, I think more and more Kashmiris will feel the benefit from these developments. They will feel it in terms of the economic landscape as it changes. They will feel it in terms of how already we have witnessed how tourism has increased manifold. And of course, as industry and Indian industry goes there and establishes itself, I think those are the concrete benefits that once they start reaching ordinary Kashmiris, Pakistan, whatever little legitimacy Pakistan may have had in the past, that will also crumble. And I think that's the message that Prime Minister also gave in his tour this time, that ultimately Pakistan is targeting that. And that India cannot allow, that Kashmir cannot allow, that ordinary Kashmiris should not allow, because
Right.
in the larger growth story of India lies the wider economic growth story of Kashmir. And I think that's a message that is now well understood, and that's a message that reverberates through these multi-domain mega infrastructure projects.
Right.
That
You,
Indian
you,
government has
you talk
unleashed.
about mega infrastructure projects. There's the vision also of self-reliance and resilience, associated with them. To what extent is this also stated emphatically, by the building of these technical marvels, the Chenab Bridge, as well as the Anji Khad Bridge?
I think it's very clear that look, for a very long time, large part of the world has been mesmerized by what China has been doing, right? And building mega projects, building putting in big infrastructure projects in place. I think increasingly what India is showcasing to the world, that India is achieving similar, if not greater feat in terms of what it can accomplish. Indian industry, Indian engineering skills, and Indian commitment to bringing a last mile delivery to ordinary Indians. That is where Indian projects are being showcased the way they are being, that this is about a self-reliant India, an India that can do these mega projects on its own. But this is also being done in a democratic setup.
Indeed.
China had been doing this in an authoritarian setup, but here is India that is trying to reach out to the last person, and those areas which remain vulnerable, whether to natural disasters or to militancy. There, India is trying to make a difference by reaching to those people who for decades have been left out of India's economic growth story. And I think that's in some ways is a very reassuring message, both to many Indians who want to be connected to India's growth story directly, but also to the rest of the world that sees a democratic India, self-reliant India, managing these mega projects on its own, effectively reaching the last mile, procuring last mile delivery as a manifestation of what can happen when a nation decides to come together, and a nation decides to become self-reliant in critical infrastructure.
Professor Pant, could India's investment in infrastructure also serve as a deterrent to cross-border terrorism in some way?
I think the biggest deterrent mark would come because of the way these infrastructure projects would link people to the Indian growth story. And I think once that happens, we will see a dramatic shift. For example, what happened this time in Pahalgam was extraordinary. That the locals, after the terror attack that happened, the local population in Pahalgam spoke in one voice that this is unacceptable, that this cannot continue. And that was a message that reverberated. That was a message that perhaps also shook Pakistan, because Pakistan had always expected support in some ways, whether explicit or implicit, towards its actions. And this time we saw after the brutal massacre, a reassuring message from the local population that because we are now reaping the benefits, economic benefits, because we are now part of Indian growth story, this is something that cannot continue, and Pakistan should mend its ways. And I think that's something that will happen more and more once these projects reach last mile delivery, once ordinary Kashmiris get themselves direct benefits from these projects.
So in the end, Professor Pant, would you say that the Prime Minister's presence in Jammu and Kashmir more than counters Pakistan's narrative on the region, it completely debunks it?
Absolutely. And I think not only Pakistan's, this whole idea that somehow Mr. Trump is here to solve this big problem of India-Pakistan. I think as India has stated, there is nothing to talk to Pakistan about. Kashmir is galloping ahead. Kashmir is moving ahead. Kashmir is moving Kashmir is stepping together with India into 21st century economic realities. There is nothing to talk to Pakistan about, only terrorism and POK. And I think that's the message that India has given. And that's a message that has not only gone to Pakistan, but also to those who think that there is something to be negotiated between India and Pakistan on the issue of Kashmir.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Harshvardhan Pant, Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation. Thank you for unpacking that for us.